think it's important to understand the history of why we are where we are today using monkeys in laboratories around the United States. And trying to understand what Harlow taught to his students is going to help us understand why what's going on today is going on today. And so we thought that we would try to present a little bit, we would try to encapsulate something about Harlow's, about Suomi's doctoral thesis to give you some background for who the people are that are out there working today and what their PhDs are based on. What you're going to hear right now is you're going to hear a presentation. Somebody's going to be reading for Suomi, direct quotes out of the book. Other people are going to be reading very close to direct quotes that have been shortened and paraphrased just a little bit to get through it. There's an awful lot to tell you. And of course we can't tell you very much. This presentation on Suomi's doctoral thesis is going to take about 15 minutes. So I think we can start.
The goal of this research was the production in young monkeys of behaviors similar to those exhibited during the despair stage of maternal separation, but for longer periods of time, in different situations, and among monkeys subjected to a variety of rearing conditions.
Experiment 1.
The primary purpose of the first experiment was to determine if the protest despair recovery reaction exhibited by monkeys separated from their mothers would be elicited via separation procedures not involving monkey mothers.
Subjects:
4 rhesus monkeys, 2 males and 2 females, separated from mothers at birth and reared for the first 15 days of life in a laboratory nursery.
At 15 days old, they were placed as a group in a cage, 6 by 3 by 4 feet, with 2 blocks of wood and 2 plastic bowls called play objects and 4 towels.
At 90 days old, the first series of separations was begun.
Procedure:
The 4 monkeys were separated from one another and housed in wire mesh cages, 2.5 by 2.5 by 2.5 feet for 4 days. The monkeys could see and hear each other but could not make physical contact. Each cage had 1 play object and 1 towel.
They were then returned to their group for 3 days.
This went on for 12 weeks. Isolated for 4 days, reunited for 3 days.
At 6 months old, they were returned to their group cage for 6 weeks, after which they went through 8 more weeks of isolation and reunion.
Isolated for 4 days, reunited for 3 days, isolated for 4 days, reunited for 3 days.
Findings:
3 clear-cut findings emerged from this study. First, the reaction to maternal separation previously described for both human and monkey infants were clearly exhibited during the weekly separation cycles by the experimental subjects. Second, the monkeys did not adapt to the multiple separations. For each separation series, the monkeys' reactions to the latter separations were at least as severe as the reactions to the first separations in the series. Finally, an overall effect of the repetitive separations was an almost complete arrest of maturations of social behaviors in the monkeys.
Discovery:
Were the monkeys depressed?
Only a qualified yes may be given. Certainly, the behaviors exhibited during the latter part of each separation, the high levels of passive self-directed behavior, and the low levels of locomotion and exploration, paralleled the description of withdrawal among human children in analogous situations with the maturational arrest in monkeys, has a possible parallel in the human retardation of development.
Experiment 2.
The technique of repetitive infant-infant separation yielded promising results for production of a depressive syndrome in monkey subjects.
Promising results for production of a depressive syndrome.
The next step involved determining if these deviations could be intensified.
A special device was built. This apparatus was termed the vertical chamber.
The vertical chamber was little more than a stainless steel trough with sides that sloped to a rounded bottom. A 3/8-inch wire mesh floor, 1 inch above the bottom of the chamber, allowed waste material to drop through the drain. The chamber was equipped with a food box and a water bottle holder, and was covered by a pyramid top designed to discourage incarcerated subjects from hanging from the upper part of the chamber.
Depression in humans has been characterized as embodying feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, being sunken in a well of despair.
And the apparatus was designed on an intuitive basis to reproduce the well physically and psychologically for the monkey subjects.
It was decided to try out the vertical chamber apparatus prior to its employment in any major experimental effort, in order to determine if monkeys could be maintained for reasonable periods of time when confined within its depths, and to see if such incarceration by itself had any appreciable behavioral consequences.
Subjects:
4 rhesus monkeys, 1 male 15 months, 1 male 6 months, 1 female 13 months, 1 female 9 months.
Separated from mothers at birth, individually housed in a bare 2.5 by 2.5 by 2.5 wire mesh cage, where they could see and hear but not have physical contact with the other monkeys.
Each subject was placed alone in the vertical chamber for 20 days, then returned to their home cage for 7 days.
Back to the chamber for 10 days, then returned to home cage.
Results:
Vertical chamber confinement had a profound and prolonged effect upon the subject's behaviors.
Self-clasping, rocking, and huddling had dramatic increases following their return to the home cage after each period of chamber confinement.
Locomotion dropped sharply following vertical chamber confinement. Environmental exploration was virtually absent. These behaviors did not dissipate over time.
Discussion:
Behavioral changes of a striking nature could be rapidly produced via vertical chamber confinement. Altered levels of behaviors persisted long after the subjects had been removed from the chambers.
Vertical chamber confinement had great potential for rapid production of severe and long-lasting psychopathological behavior.
Rapid production of severe and long-lasting psychopathological behavior.
This potential was further explored in the experiment which follows.
Experiment 3.
Suomi knew that the most effective behavioral manipulation for the production of permanent psychopathological behavior in monkeys was at least 6 months of total isolation beginning at birth.
And he knew that 3 months of total isolation beginning at birth failed to produce permanent effects.
On the basis of the findings of the previous experiment, I decided to compare the psychopathology producing potential of the vertical chamber apparatus with the isolation procedures.
Monkeys were to be reared for the first 3 months of their lives within the vertical chamber, then subjected to extensive post-incarceration testing to determine if any lasting behavioral anomalies would be disclosed.
However, it was discovered that infant monkeys could not be maintained effectively in a vertical chamber until they are 45 days old.
The decision was made to incarcerate subjects beginning at this age for a total of 45 days.
Subjects:
4 male rhesus monkeys, separated from mothers at birth. First 45 days of life in a lab nursery.
Procedure:
At 45 days of age, each subject was placed in the vertical chamber for 45 days, 6.5 weeks.
They were then removed from the vertical chamber and placed in a bare wire mesh cage.
Results:
The results of Experiment 3 indicated that the 45-day period of vertical chamber confinement early in life produced severe and prolonged psychopathological behavior of a depressive nature in the rhesus monkey subjects.
After being removed from the chambers, the monkeys self-clasped and huddled at enormously elevated levels.
The monkeys locomoted and explored significantly less than both control groups and exhibited essentially no socially directed behaviors.
Their behaviors could be described as a severe caricature of the despair stage exhibited by monkeys separated from mothers or peers.
It is clear that behavioral disturbances of a stable and lasting nature were produced by vertical chamber confinement of a remarkably short time. The further use of vertical chamber incarceration as a technique for production of depressive behavior thus seemed justified.
Experiment 4.
Having established that the use of the vertical chamber was an effective technique for production in monkeys of psychopathological behavior of a depressive nature, the next step was to combine the manipulation of chamber incarceration with separation procedures. A logical combination was repetitive peer separation involving chamber confinement during the periods of separation.
Subjects:
4 rhesus monkeys, 2 male and 2 female, separated from mothers at birth, reared in laboratory nursery for the first 15 days of life.
At age 15 days, monkeys were placed in a group of 4 in a cage 6 by 3 by 4 feet with 4 cloth towels and 2 bowls and 2 pieces of wood.
Do that part over again. Identical to experiment 1. They were undisturbed until they were 3 months old.
Procedure:
At 3 months of age, the monkeys spent 4 days of separation, 3 days of reunion, then 4 days of separation, then 3 days of reunion. This occurred 12 times.
Like experiment 1, they then had a 6-week reunion, followed by 8 more weeks of the separation-reunion routine.
However, when separated, the monkeys were not individually housed in single cages, as in the first experiment. Instead, they were placed in individual vertical chambers, where they could hear but neither see nor touch each other.
Thus, the monkeys in this study were subjected to 24-day periods of separation during which they were confined to vertical chambers.
The monkeys were not observed when they were confined to the vertical chambers.
Results:
Monkeys confined to the vertical chamber during repetitive infant-infant separation exhibited protest, despair, and recovery reactions to separation and showed severe maturational arrest.
The monkeys vocalized at exceedingly high levels and moved about inside the vertical chambers for approximately the first day of each separation.
By the 3rd and 4th day of separations, however, the monkeys typically assumed a huddling position in a corner of the chamber.
Chamber confinement made socially abnormal more abnormal, while causing relatively normal subjects to become far less normal.
Final conclusions.
My goal of the reliable production of stable depressive syndromes in young monkey subjects was attained by these studies. Experimentation with therapeutic agents and techniques utilizing human patients is seriously hampered by lack of experimental control and by sound ethical constraints. No such problems exist for the monkey researcher. My research has demonstrated that depressive behavior of a stable and lasting form can be induced reliably in young monkey subjects. Having established the behavioral basis for an animal model, it is now the task of further research to make the experimental model useful.